All right, everybody. Ready for a wild ride through history?
Sounds exciting. What do we have lined up?
We're diving deep into the life of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Ah, Napoleon.
Uh,
A fascinating and controversial figure.
Definitely. And to keep things interesting, we're using his Wikipedia page as our main source.
So no sugarcoating, just the facts, and maybe a few opinions along the way.
Exactly. It's like we're having a conversation directly with the source material.
I like it. Unfiltered history. Where should we begin?
Well, let's rewind all the way back to 1769, Corsica. That's where young Napoleon enters the scene.
Ah, Corsica, an island with a bit of a complex relationship with France, to say the least.
That's putting it mildly. Napoleon was born just a year after Corsica became French territory. How much do you think that impacted his life?
Oh, undoubtedly, it played a huge role. Imagine growing up Corsican, but under French rule, facing prejudice from both sides. It's a recipe for a complex identity.
Yeah, talk about a recipe for ambition, too.
That's right. Napoleon experienced that firsthand. He was even mocked for his Corsican accent early on.
Which is kind of ironic because now, well, his French is practically what we think of as classic French.
Exactly. It just goes to show how he mastered the very culture that initially rejected him. That kind of experience can light a fire under a person.
Speaking of fires, what about the whole little bony thing? Did Napoleon really live up to that nickname?
Not even close. He was actually average height for the time. It
Really?
was more of a dig from the British press.
Ah, classic propaganda.
Exactly. It shows how easily perceptions are manipulated, even back then.
It makes you wonder what other stories we believe that might not be totally true. But anyway, back to Napoleon. What always fascinates me is how crazy fast his rise to power was. How does someone go from an artillery officer to a national hero in just a few short years?
Well, you can't tell Napoleon's story without mentioning the French Revolution, right?
True, true. It was a time of massive upheaval, chaos, really.
And that chaos created opportunities for ambitious people, especially those with military talent.
Like our friend Napoleon.
Exactly. He scores early victories at the Siege of Toulon, and this event called 13 Vendémiaire. These really put him on the map.
Yeah, but for those of us who haven't memorized every date in French history, can you refresh our memories on what those were all about?
Of course. So Toulon, that was a key moment early on for Napoleon. He was still a pretty junior officer, but he devised this brilliant strategy that broke the siege. It was a huge victory.
And it really got him noticed.
Exactly. Then you have 13 Vendémiaire, which was way more politically charged. Napoleon basically saved the revolutionary government by putting down an uprising in Paris.
Wow, talk about a power move.
Right. These early wins showed everyone not only that he was a skilled military leader, but also pretty ruthless and ambitious.
All the ingredients you need to rise to power in a revolution.
You could say that again.
So Napoleon's got some big wins under his belt. He's gaining influence. What does he do?
Well, he doesn't rest on his laurels, that's for sure. He dives headfirst into a series of campaigns that would reshape the map of Europe.
Talk about a busy schedule.
It's really remarkable. Take his Italian campaign, for example. This is where Napoleon really cemented his reputation as a military genius. Leading the French army, he just swept through Italy, winning victory after victory against the Austrians.
This is when he starts calling himself liberator, right? Spreading those revolutionary ideals.
Exactly. And that's the interesting thing about Napoleon. He was a master of presenting himself as a champion of the people, bringing liberty and enlightenment to the masses.
But at the same time, he wasn't afraid to use force to get what he wanted.
No, not at all. And that's the duality that defines his legacy. Was he a liberator or a conqueror? A hero or a tyrant? It all depends on who you ask.
History is rarely black and white.
Exactly. Now, speaking of expanding his reach, let's not forget about the Egyptian expedition. This one is fascinating because it takes us far beyond the borders of France.
Why Egypt? What was Napoleon hoping to accomplish all the way out there?
Well, on a practical level, he saw Egypt as a stepping stone to disrupting British trade routes to India.
Always going to take on the British Empire, right?
It was a major goal for France at the time. But there was also a more, shall we say, romantic side to it. Napoleon was deeply fascinated by ancient Egyptian civilization. He actually brought along a whole team of scientists and scholars to document their findings.
Wait, really? So it wasn't all about conquest?
Napoleon understood that knowledge is power too. The expedition might have failed militarily, but those scholars made some incredible discoveries that had a lasting impact.
That's amazing. It's like something out of an Indiana Jones movie.
It really is. But while all of this is happening, amid the military campaigns and scientific expeditions, Napoleon's personal life is also pretty eventful.
Because nobody's life is that simple.
Right. This is when he meets and marries Josephine.
Ah, Josephine. A love story for the ages.
Well, their relationship was definitely passionate, but it was also a strategic alliance. Josephine was well connected in Parisian society. Marrying her helped solidify Napoleon's position,
So, love and politics. Always a good combination.
especially in those days. But let's get back to the battlefield, shall we? We can't talk about Napoleon without discussing the Napoleonic Wars. This is where things get really intense.
Intense is putting it mildly. These wars engulfed all of Europe.
They did. It's a complex period. But there's one battle we absolutely have to talk about. The Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. It's considered by many to be Napoleon's greatest victory.
Austerlitz. I remember reading about it in school. Wasn't that where Napoleon completely outmaneuvered the combined forces of Austria and Russia?
That's the one. He completely anticipated their moves, used their own strategies against them. It was a tactical masterpiece, really,
And it cemented his reputation as a military genius.
without a doubt.
Austerlitz. It's almost like a textbook example of just how powerful Napoleon could be on the battlefield. But did all that victory go to his head?
That's a great question. And it's something historians debate. Did Austerlitz kind of push him over the edge?
Towards
Well, towards becoming more autocratic, more focused on his own legacy. Did he start putting his own ambitions above the good of France? It's tough to say for sure.
Yeah. And we can't forget, all those victories, they came at a price. I mean, millions of people died in the Napoleonic Wars.
Absolutely. That's the other side of the coin, isn't it? The human cost of Napoleon's ambition. It's a sobering thought.
It really is. So we have this incredibly talented, but also incredibly ruthless leader. How do we reconcile those two sides? Especially since he also ushered in so many reforms, changed society in ways that we still feel today.
Right, it's that complex legacy, and I think the Napoleonic Code is a perfect example of that. This wasn't just some legal document, it was like a blueprint for a modern state. Standardized laws, equality before the law, it was revolutionary.
And it got rid of that old feudal system, right?
Exactly, it was a huge step forward.
And the Napoleonic Code, that wasn't just a French thing, was it?
Oh no, not at all. It spread like wildfire. Became a model for legal systems across Europe and even further. Even today, we see its influence in the way laws are written and enforced.
Wow. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. But it wasn't just the legal system he shook up. Education, banking, even the way we measure things, that's all thanks to Napoleon.
He was big on standardization. He knew that to really have a strong state, things needed to be efficient, organized.
So the metric system, that was all him.
Well, he helped popularize it, made it the standard in France, and from there it spread throughout the world. Like I said, the guy was a master of influence.
Speaking of influence, we can't forget about that iconic pose of his, hand tucked into his waistcoat. You're telling me that wasn't calculated?
Napoleon.
God,
I'm shocked.
nah.
No, I'm kidding. Of course it was deliberate. He understood the power of image. That pose, it projected authority, control.
And it's everywhere. Paintings, sculptures, even today you see it referenced.
It's an image that's lasted through the centuries. But of course, even the most carefully crafted image can crumble. And that's ultimately what happened with Napoleon's empire.
His first exile, that was in 1814, right, after a series of defeats?
Yep. But then, of course, he escapes, returns to France, and stages that dramatic comeback. The 100 Days. It's like something out of a movie.
It's crazy, but it didn't last, did it?
No. Napoleon met his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815.
And that was it. Exiled again, this time to St. Helena, a remote island in the middle of the Atlantic.
A far cry from the halls of power in Paris.
He died there a few years later, right?
He did in 1821.
Under mysterious circumstances, some would say.
Well, there are those theories about arsenic poisoning.
Right. Was it foul play or just natural causes? We may never know for sure.
That's part of what makes Napoleon such an enduring figure. The mystery, the controversy, it all adds to the legend.
So where does this leave us? Who was Napoleon Bonaparte? A hero or a tyrant? A visionary or a despot?
Honestly, I think he was a bit of all of those things. A study in contradictions. A brilliant military strategist, a shrewd politician, but also a man driven by ambition, sometimes to the detriment of others. His legacy is complex.
It really is. And that's what makes studying history so fascinating. It's not about easy answers. It's about grappling with these big questions, these complicated figures.
Exactly. And even after all this time, Napoleon still has us talking, still has us debating his place in history.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. It's been a wild ride full of triumphs and tragedies, revolutions and reforms. But most importantly, it's got us thinking right. And that's what we're always hoping for.
Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive.